The BBC has put out a video so craftily and misleadingly edited on the subject of Donald Trump's sunlight and bleach comments that part of me wonders if John Sweeney hasn't somehow snuck back in through the back door to give them some tips on video editing. And the thing is, they kind of had Trump on his bleach comments, so they didn't have to go the extra mile, but they did anyway.
His comments came after preliminary US government research suggested the virus dies more quickly when exposed to sunlight and heat. Caroline Hawley reports.
Research is underway by the Department of Homeland Security on the effects of sunlight and heat on the virus.
Thank you very much.
Prompting this from the President.
A question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting.
And we will pause there. Did that look a bit strange at the end? Just rewind that last bit and see if you can spot the problem.
Thank you very much.
Prompting this from the President.
A question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting.
Yes, Mike Pence vanished. Hey Mike, bye Mike. That's like the next frame of the BBC video. From the way those two clips have been edited together, it looks like for all the world that Trump walked out on stage and immediately launched into some kind of an improvised rant. So this here is the actual order of events. This was their walkout on stage. Apologies for the bad quality. I downloaded it in low resolution.
Thank you very much. Later this evening,
Pence is still there and Trump kicks off the business. Here's the BBC clip again.
Thank you very much.
Prompting this from the President.
A question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting.
So now look at the actual bit before Trump said, a question that probably, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. So I asked Bill a question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world.
Who is that and where did he spring from? Those two segments, which the BBC edited to pull together so it made it look like Trump was just launching into some kind of an improvised rant, and nothing whatsoever to do with the scientific presentation that it was based on, were actually 25 minutes apart. Hence, now you see him, now you don't. Now you see him, now you don't. That's why Pence vanishes. The fellow was a bloke called Bill Bryan, who's the head of a science and technical department in the government. And here is an edited summary version of his presentation. It's about a minute's worth to give you the general idea. The full thing was about 5 minutes.
If I may have the first slide, please. And while that's coming up, our most striking observation to date is the powerful effect that solar light appears to have on killing the virus, both surfaces and in the air. And if you look at as the temperature increases and as the humidity increases with no sun involved, you can see how drastically the half-life goes down on that virus. So the virus is dying at a much more rapid pace just from exposure to higher temperatures and just from exposure to humidity. If you look at the fourth line, you inject the sunlight into that, you inject UV rays into that, the same effects on line 2 at 70 to 75 degrees with 80% humidity on the surface, and look at line 4, but now you inject the sun, the half-life goes from 6 hours to 2 minutes. That's how much of an impact the UV rays has on the virus. We're also testing disinfectants readily available. We've tested bleach, we've tested isopropyl alcohol on the virus, specifically in saliva or in respiratory fluids. And I can tell you that bleach will kill the virus in 5 minutes. Isopropyl alcohol will kill the virus in 30 seconds, and that's with no manipulation, no rubbing, just spraying it on and leaving it go. You rub it and it goes away even faster. Thank you very much.
The study conclusions were that sunlight radically undermines the infection and bleach kills it stone dead on surfaces, of course. So now back to the BBC, and remember that this question occurred 25 minutes after the BBC presented it as occurring.
A question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way.
The scientist who leads America's response to the pandemic could barely conceal her thoughts on the President's idea.
Not as a treatment. I mean, certainly fever is a good thing when you have a fever. It helps your body respond.
either through the skin or some other way, and then cut straight to the medical expert Deborah Birx. And remember, we still think that's a question he's hooked out of nowhere because the BBC didn't play any part of the science presentation. Here's the actual clip.
And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
And the BBC cut.
And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way.
The scientist who leads America's response to the pandemic could barely conceal her thoughts on the president's idea.
So where did Deborah Birx's intervention actually come from? Another 25 minutes later, and remember, this is not the first 25-minute jump, this is the second one.
Deborah, have you ever heard of that, the heat and the light relative to certain viruses, yes, but relative to this virus?
Not as a treatment. I mean, certainly fever is a good thing when you have a fever.
Are you confused? I made the video and I am confused at this point. I will clarify everything. This is what happened. Trump walked out on stage with Pence, they kicked the press briefing off, did a bit of business, there was a presentation, and after the presentation Trump asked the medical officer who gave the presentation, he asked him a question. The BBC pulled all of that together, cutting out the presentation and making it look like Trump walked on stage and then just flipped a question straight out of the ether. Now the bloke who Trump asked the question to, you can't really hear much of his response. I don't think there was much of a response. So the BBC then leapt forward another 25 minutes, took Deborah Birx's response to another similar question, pulled out everything in the middle, made it look like that she was responding to Trump's question to the bloke who gave the presentation, and in such a way that she was somehow jumping in, intervening a bit rudely, when in fact all Trump had done was asked her to comment. He directed the question to her and she responded about the issues about sunlight. And here, just to finish this section off, is the BBC's version of that. Bear in mind that all this took 50 minutes to occur, 50 minutes to occur. I've cut out about 10 seconds of Trump's question, but this is basically, apart from those missing 10 seconds, just to abbreviate things, what the BBC represented it as.
Thank you very much.
Prompting this from the president.
And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way.
The scientist who leads America's response to the pandemic could barely conceal her thoughts on the president's idea.
That is, 3 different segments edited together to look like one with a shed load of relevant stuff deleted. Okay, on to the Bleach.
But Mr. Trump had another suggestion up his sleeve.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection?
The girl starts off with another trick up his sleeve, again as if Trump had just pulled this whole subject out of the air without any basis on the medical presentation that it was based on and which he was responding to. The BBC and all the other media have pretty much hidden that fact. Now, there is no doubt that Trump did misunderstand the reference to bleach for the purpose of killing the infection on surfaces as using bleach for possible injection, and that's why he's now having to back away from those comments talking about being sarcastic. In fairness, it wasn't absolutely clear in the presentation, and I suspect that fella talking about saliva and respiratory fluids is probably what sent Trump down the internal route rather than the exclusively external one. The BBC video says absolutely nothing about bleach in the presentation, and they only mention the presentation at all very slightly at the beginning. And I absolutely must have missed where he talked about drinking detergent, because they claim he did.
To suggest that you can sort of inject or drink detergent and you'll get rid of it is complete nonsense and actually quite dangerous. So I think it is very worrying that some people might take his words literally.
It would be dangerous to drink detergent. Fortunately, Trump didn't say anything about drinking detergent, but that didn't stop the BBC from showcasing a professor from King's College London who falsely claimed he did. So, they left out all the video of the medical presentation that Trump was basing his questions and his general spitballing of ideas on, and the only reference they made to Bleach was that little bit in the corner early on. There was no verbal reference to it anywhere in the BBC piece. His comments about sunlight were entirely fair, and the BBC have done their predictable hatchet job on them. Clearly, yes, he did misunderstand the issue of bleach, but the BBC couldn't bring themselves to say that he went wrong as a consequence of spitballing ideas, as he always does from a medical presentation. They couldn't give it that tinge of legitimacy, even if they could have obviously said, well, it's obvious enough that the bloke meant external use only, for heaven's sake. They couldn't bring themselves to say that, to even mention that it had sprung from a medical presentation. They couldn't be upfront. They had to go that little extra mile and falsify it. And you pay for it.